Welcome back to Two Canoes Radio on the WYSL stations. Again, here's your host, Ronnie Pollack.
Thank you, Bob. In studio today, I have with me Terry Jones, a filmmaker. Thank you so much for joining us today, Terry. Terry is an enrolled member of the Seneca Nation of Indians. He grew up and is currently living in Newtown and is a member of the Wolf Clan. Terry has a passion for sharing his Haudenosaunee history and culture through his film works. He strives to find a balance between entertaining and educating his audiences. Yeah, for sure. I found your films, definitely to balance both of those. Terry's work has been screened all over the world, including the Imagine Native Film and Media Arts Festival in Toronto, where his films Empire State and Soup for My Brother and Ode to the Nine had their international premieres there. Terry would also like to use his art as an agent of change. Like many other communities, Terry's home territory is confronted with many issues that negatively impact its quality of life. Things like loss of language, drug abuse, diabetes, environmental dangers, public safety, and injustices that unfortunately are very prevalent on many reservations here on Turtle Island. So it is Terry's hope that his future film projects will promote and facilitate dialogue that can influence changes in public policy. So Terry, welcome to Two Canoes with Ronnie Pollack. It's my pleasure to have you.
Hi, Ronnie. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah. So Terry, why don't you tell us a little bit of the background story and information, if you will, and what got you into filmmaking?
Okay. I grew up in Newtown, which is on the Cattaraugus territory on the Seneca Nation. And growing up, the Newtown tends to be, or is known as the most traditional community on territory. So we were like the last ones to assimilate, more or less, last ones to speak English. So growing up, of course, I only had access to like TV, and the moving image always interested me. And it wasn't until there were some federal programs that the Seneca Nation had brought in called Johnson O'Malley, and so they introduced us into photography. So this one summer we did a photojournalism class, and it was called the Reservation Times. I still have a copy of it. And we worked all summer just taking pictures, developing 35 millimeter film, learning about composition.
Right.
And of course, while keeping your composure.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. And, but in terms of like filmmaking itself, it was only something that was brought in through your TV. I never knew any other filmmakers, or I said I want to be like my father's a roofer. It's not like I want to be a roofer like my dad. I'm like I want to be a filmmaker like silence, empty space. So, so I went through high school with photography. It still always interested me, and then. It wasn't until I was living in New York for a while, and then 9/11 happened, and then I lost my job, and then I just ended up borrowing a camera from one of my friends, and I made my first short film, which was called What in the Heck is Corn Soup? So I would have these corn soup parties in New York City, and I would make the soup, and then I would serve it. But then when I would explain the ingredients, they're very basic. There's no spices in it. It's just Iroquois white corn, wood ash, kidney beans, and salt pork. And then people are like, what do you do with the ashes? Am I eating the ashes? So so I made this short film. It ended up being 15 minutes. So I edited it together, and then before I would have my parties, I would screen it, and then it would pretty much answer everybody's question.
Cool.
So So then in 2012, I decided to go to school. Syracuse University has a really great Native student program called the Haudenosaunee Promise Scholarship. Any student who gets accepted in Haudenosaunee, any territory within New York State and Canada, they get accepted in, and they kind of get a full ride. So when I decided to go back, I'm like, do I go back to finish? Because I didn't finish my bachelor's the first time I went to school in computer science. I said, do I do computer science or do I do film? So I decided to do film.
Okay.
And so when I applied, I got accepted. I had to turn in like a 5-minute little mini reel. And thinking that Syracuse was such it's a big university, over 20,000 students. I thought for sure there's going to be other non-traditional students in the film program. Well, I was really surprised when I got there, and I was with 49 other freshman students, and they all just graduated high school. Oh. And then there was me.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah. So the biggest question that people had there was like, how old are you? How old are you? And I said, well, I really don't want to be judged by how many times I revolved around the sun. I want to be known as Terry. And I'd like to think after the 4 years that I had been there, I graduated summa cum laude. I graduated first in my class in the College of Visual Performing Arts. And I gave this, thanks, gave a really big speech at the Carrier Dome. So, when I do presentations or screenings of my short films, I end up telling people I'm like the living proof of like it's never too late to learn. Sometimes all we need are opportunities, and sometimes they're not as prevalent, maybe sometimes with Native cultures. And so that's sort of how I got into filmmaking.
Yeah, and so then where did so once you got into that was your entrance, going through the program at Syracuse, where did then the journey kind of continue to take you on from there or evolve? What did it evolve into from there?
Yeah, so one thing that in one of my classes, a colloquium class, they said today we're going to look at art. So I was like, okay, great. So we sat there, and it was all Western art. And I'm like, well, what was the rest of the world doing while Western art was being created? And I got a little angry, but then they ended up assigning us some texts from Walter Benjamin. He was a German philosopher. He was like a whole bunch of things. But he wrote this one essay called something about living in the age of mechanical reproduction. And what it more or less explains in a nutshell is that art, like say the Mona Lisa, before it was reproduced, it had cult value. So it was only associated with at a place and a certain time. And once things started to be mass produced, that image could go all over the world. It can go everywhere. Right. So then I just started to think about that in terms of Native art. It's only been recently that we think about it, like we do a lot of beadwork, carving, like a lot of traditional art. And where I say filmmaking is more new, but I'm like, there's got to be a certain time when we started to do things for exhibition art. For everything that I've known traditionally, whether even if it's a lacrosse stick or a water drum or a turtle rattle, those all had function. Right. They weren't made specifically to be put on a wall.
Right.
Yeah. So it was that sort of having that sort of lens looking at art was different, I think, than the typical or dominant culture perspective going in. So my first day of class, I ended up introducing myself as American Indian. And there was a guy sitting across from me. His name's Govind DC. He was from India. So when he introduced himself, he goes, I'm Govind, I'm from India. And all of a sudden the class just sort of got this one word that had so many different connotations to it. And what ended up happening, we ended up collaborating on probably 15 to 20 short film class assignments during our time there in 4 years. And once we graduated, I ended up submitting them into film festivals. And I think I'm up to maybe 12 short films that have screened in there were official selections in 50 film festivals around the world.
Oh, wow, 50. That's great. Yeah, congrats. Yeah, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. And it allows you to take your not just your story and your art and what you've created, but really creating it for our people too, and for that exposure. So to get that opportunity and that kind of level to take it really all over the world, I mean that's great. Yeah. So Yahweh.
Yeah, and I mentioned before that it's like it's a line between entertaining and educating, because I don't want to do like a native culture for dummies where our own people would be like, we know that's common, right. But then I don't want this stories to be so specific that non-native people would be saying like, what is this about? What are you trying to tell me?
Yeah. So. Yeah. So what can you identify as, challenges and or successes to being an indigenous independent filmmaker?
Yeah,
like what's the difference, right? Because everybody kind of looks at filmmaking like, oh, I'd love to be a filmmaker. It seems so glamorous and great, and it would be so easy.
Yeah,
but you have a different perspective. Yeah,
yeah. It's as you mentioned earlier, I had 4 of my films actually have international premiere at the Imaginative Film Festival in Toronto, and a lot of the programs that Canada has for Indigenous filmmakers was far outweighs anything that we have here in the States. And I sit there jealous in some ways because, they offer great mentorship programs, funding. And here in the States, we pretty much have the Sundance Native Institute, or I think Native American Public Telecommunications in Lincoln, Nebraska. They do public television like documentaries. But aside from that, there's not really many resources to go. And it's sort of like, when I look at it, being an independent filmmaker is like how I really thought about being an artist in the beginning. I'm like, I don't have anybody's footsteps to follow in, but I couldn't imagine being in being of the dominant culture, and your path is that path has already been cut like millions of times. And so why look at it that way? I'm like, it's actually a good challenge. I actually have a machete that I can kind of cut my own path through. And that's sort of what I've been doing. It's been almost 3 years since I graduated from Syracuse, and it's been a big learning curve in terms of, it's great to get into film festivals, and I've tried to attend as many as I could, but there's a lot of different background things that they have different screening formats. You have to do a press kit. They need your bio, they need your pictures, they need film stills. That stuff is great, but then you talk about social media. So, it's like, okay, I need a Twitter account, I need a LinkedIn account, I need a Facebook page for my films. And then now what I'm also doing now is I'm self-distributing my own work. I know there's a big thing going on right now in terms of streaming services, but I'm streaming on my own website, which is TornJerseyMedia.com. And,
and get another opportunity to share that too. Yeah.
And then I'm also selling the DVDs because, as well, a lot of Native communities, they don't have access to fast internet, and a lot of them still rely on DVDs. And I think I'd like to think it's a great little niche that I'm able to tap into. So in terms of my successes and how you view this, my experience as an independent filmmaker is being successful. It looks like I might have a magic formula, but really, and I tell people, even though I've gotten into 50 film festivals, there's about 150 I didn't get into. So, it's those sort of things where you have to learn not to take it personal. Yes, it's your life work and it's your blood, sweat, and tears you're putting into it, but you can't take it personal. I do a little bit.
Sure. I mean, it's kind of hard not to, I'm sure. But I love the part what you say too. It's like you have a machete, and you're able to create and carve this whole new path. And this whole new way that's like, we don't want to do it like the dominating culture. We want a standard and a way that is completely our own, and that, like you say too, even in that balancing that our people can relate to, and it's like, oh yeah, that is about us, but other people can come in and learn too, but it's not wow, I have no idea what this is about, where you're able to bring balance to both of that. So I think it's great. I mean, I really, and Yawagoa for carving that path for many generations that are going to come alongside and like, hey, I can do that too.
I mean, for me, it's like my legacy. What do I want to leave behind? And I don't necessarily, I don't have any children. I'm not planning on having any children, but I feel like I don't need to leave a part of my DNA behind to leave my impact on the world. And I'd like to think that, that my film works will be able to speak for me from beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. For many, many generations to come. Yeah. So as artists too, right, they, or you, I should say, definitely, push boundaries. But what some of the restrictions, when including our history and our culture, maybe in your film works, how does that, kind of, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, there's, because, part of the filmmaking studies that we had, we would look at other films, and you can look at things that are taboo, whether it, whatever nature it is, even violence, say like Tarantino, and it could be celebrated and like, wow, it's so fresh and exciting. But from a Native perspective, especially like with my short documentary Soup for My Brother, I use the voice of my great grandfather in the video or in the film itself, and same with images. And I didn't ask permission. I mean, and same with what my great-grandfather was saying was Gonyonyuk, which is the Thanksgiving address. So those words kind of belong to everybody. And same with
right.
Yeah, and same with music. There's I think the other short narrative I did, Give and Take. It's somebody back home singing a social song. So I have to be very mindful on how, I want to push boundaries and do things that are fresh, but at the same time I have to this kind of internal balance regulator that I have to be careful how I use those songs or those words. Because if I use it, say something violent in my film when I'm having some social song in there, it totally gives it a bad context. So I didn't ask permission, but the response I get and that would be the worst thing for me, is from someone from my community saying, one, who do you think you are? Or two, you're really misappropriating or giving bad light in terms of, how that's being used. And,
Yeah, that's true. So, keeping all of that in mind too, as you're creating your films, and obviously you're wanting to be respectful to our culture, and would never want to condemn any of that or anything like that. But that's something too that I think somebody from outside looking in, that wouldn't necessarily be one of the thoughts. So like, it's your culture, of course you'd put it in there. But there are things that are very ceremonial or very sacred. Certain songs that you're right, you couldn't use, or or certain images maybe that that couldn't be used as well too. Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about I'll let you pick and choose too. Mm-hmm. If there are any of your films that you want to talk about, that you want to highlight, that was maybe like your true life, blood, sweat, and tears. I'm sure they all are, but yeah.
They the one thing that is interesting from my perspective is trying to find my way not only within mainstream. I mean, I don't want to go to Hollywood and make blockbuster or make these superhero maybe we do need a native superhero character, but that's not, that's what I wouldn't, it's not my cup of tea. So right. And then also me trying to meander trying to work my way through the native established filmmaking sector as well. And when you talk about native cinema or indigenous cinema in America, people already have a pretty strong perception of what that means. I think the first thing that comes into mind is smoke signals. And I'm not criticizing anything about it at all, but in terms of people really have a certain idea of how natives speak and how natives look. And I'd like to think in terms of the productions that I do, narrative and documentary, I'm using Haudenosaunee or Seneca cult people or actors, and same with the history. But one of the successes that I think that I appreciate is, so how does this translate outside? I always say pitching a native film or an indigenous film is like pitching a foreign film, especially within America, because there's so much in America that people don't know about our culture. So when I watch a foreign film, I'm looking to see, where do they live? What do they drive? Where do they go to school? And I know those are the same questions, and I'm mindful of that when I put these film projects together, that people are going to be mindful of, like, what's in the corner or what's in my yard. But for me, when Soup for My Brother, my short doc that I did with my dad, it's a 10-minute doc that we shot in one afternoon. And that film got into 17 film festivals around the world, but it actually was awarded Best Documentary in Liverpool, England. Wow. So, and I did a little research. They got 2,600 submissions. They accepted 100. Within that are narrative and short, music videos. And so we got notified that we were shortlisted for Best Doc with two other films. And then we got an email like the day before Thanksgiving, and they said, "Congratulations, you won." And my mom and I we almost got got teary-eyed because she was like, "We won," and it's a really powerful thing to realize that my little film had transcended the ocean. And I think Soup for My Brother and Empire State also have played at the Native Spirit Film Festival in London. They screened there this past fall. And it's really, as I said, I don't have some magic formula. I'd like to think that what I've learned at Syracuse has given me, or has allowed, and being in these film festivals afterwards has let me grow into the sense that I have a certain style, I have a certain way of telling stories that there's an audience for. And I'm not really copying anybody. I'm influenced by a lot of other filmmakers, namely Mike Lee and Chantal Ackerman, long takes, giving room. You've seen with my films that I give, we don't do any fast cuts. It's all giving the audience time to process, time to embody the character they're watching. What are they thinking? What am I thinking?
Yeah. Yeah, even too, like, in your films, when you're on the res and, pulling into the house, and I'm like, oh, yeah, this is it. This is what it feels like. This is what it looks like. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I love that element is there because, like you say, people, when you look at other films, you're kind of depicting that like, oh, well, what is it like in that land? But, sad the reality that if there was any American that were to see, an Indigenous Native American film, there's so much that they wouldn't recognize about it. So I love that, you're bringing a lot of these things to light. And it truly does, folks. Really, Terry's films have a true balance of entertainment and, but education as well, too. Yeah. So what do you feel, what, is there anything, you're willing to reveal that might be on the agenda next or?
Yeah, actually yesterday
what you got cooking up?
Actually, Govind, my film collaborator from India, he's coming in July. We're going to be a little ambitious. We're going to try to shoot 3 short films over the summer. One of them is called Sone, SEWN. And it's about 2 girls, young girls in boarding school who try to plot to run away. They attempt, they get caught, and they get put in confinement. And the only thing they really have to share between the 2 of them is this tattered old blanket. So they're kind of deemed troublemakers, so they separate them. So the younger girl starts to have this anxiety attack when the older girl is getting taken away. So the older girl takes this blanket, rips it in half, and she gives it to the young girl. Well, this is kind of stories told in flashbacks. So we realize that they've not seen each other for all of their lives, and now the younger girl is now in hospice care as an elder. So the older girl goes to meet her, and when they meet, she brings the piece of blanket together, and they sew that blanket back together again.
Oh my goodness! Wow, yeah, incredible.
So in this, so as I said, funding is kind of hard to come by, so we're self-financing it. The nice thing is that I now have my DVDs or my films available on DVD, and the newly. It's been around for 30 years, but they have a new building. The Seneca Iroquois National Museum is now carrying my DVDs in their gift shop.
Awesome.
So it's given us a nice little chunk of seed money to start the process.
Sure. And that story, too, oh, my gosh. It just hits home because my granny, really quickly, she was in residential school. She was in the mush hole, and she had escaped and made it all the way home in winter, only with the clothes on her back, but only to be met by her mother putting her in the buggy. They didn't have a car then, putting her in the buggy and taking her right back to the place where she came from. So, so it's so sad. But those stories need to be told.
Yeah, and they're universal.
Yeah,
it really could be story behind the Iron Curtain or in the concentration camp.
Yeah.
So I think that's the key for storytelling is making it universal.
Yeah, because then that's where the healing can come in too. Yeah. All right, Terry, why don't you take us out then and let folks know where they can find you, just kind of rattle off as much information if you want to give us.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. My website is TornJerseyMedia.com. There I also have my online store, so you can purchase my DVDs. You can stream my DVD or stream my films there as well. And
all right, email.
Come check it out.
Yeah. And that's on there as
it's
well
on the
too.
Website. Contact.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah, and folks, if you want to host a film screening event, certainly reach out to him. It's a great and worthy cause, and it's his work is phenomenal, so you won't be disappointed. So thanks everyone for joining us here on another episode of Two Canoes with Ronnie Pollack. Again, bringing you information about everything Indigenous to Turtle Island that you won't hear elsewhere. We'll see you next month.